Thought I'd do a bit of an update as to where we are at the moment. So the last thing you would have seen was pulling the valves out of the cylinder head with my magic little valve clip removing tool. So I've cleaned up the head inside there as best I can at this stage. So I've taken a lot of the carbon out. Still not back to a bare metal finish, but it's definitely in there fairly smooth, and I'm reasonably happy with that. I'm still going to clean up a little pointer thing. So these are the valve seats that the valve sits on. I still want to clean those up a little bit better. These ones don't look too bad. The exhaust side's always a bit rougher because that's with all the carbon as the result of combustion, etc. Goes out through, so they're always usually a bit rougher. So yeah, and still need to clean that out a bit more. Looking at the valves, so this is the inlet valve. I'll zoom in like that. So a valve should have on the side here a nice 45-degree angle, as far as I'm aware. I'll just grab that one up that way. These ones, no, you're not going to see that. I'll zoom in that way a bit. These ones you can see have got quite a bevel on them, as in a little lip at the end here. So that means they're worn. So they're kind of flat. That little piece there is flat, then it starts sloping out there. So that piece of material that should go across that in 45 degrees has been worn out from the valve bang up and down inside the cylinder head. The speedo shows 17,000 kilometres travelled. I'm not sure if that's the original speedo or if the speedo stopped working at some point. I would have thought that 17,000 kilometres is not a long way for a valve to be running, but they look pretty worn. So now I'm thinking, do I actually replace them with some new ones, or do I make do with that? There's still plenty of meat left on the valve. If the valve gets worn down too much, you can actually suck them into the engine head. So as the piston comes up and the combustion happens, if this valve is actually worn so thin, that part can give way and the whole valve can disappear up into the cylinder head, which is fairly catastrophic. But I think there's still a bit of meat there. But having said that, definitely quite a bit of wear compared to a new one. I think there's about $30 to get a reasonable quality set of valves delivered to me. So the exhaust valve shows much the same. It's just not as clean as that one, so I thought I'd show that one. It's one of those things, is it worth spending the money on or not? I think valves are probably fairly important in terms of creating a good combustion seal. So if the valves aren't sealing properly, you get gases leaking around the valve, so therefore your combustion is not as effective, so you get less power. Also, if the valve's not seating properly, the valves generate a lot of heat, and the way they cool down is by seating. I'll just pop that one in here to that side. Try to see what I'm doing through the camera. There we go. So the way they cool down is actually by seating around on the cylinder head, and the cylinder head dissipates or absorbs that heat from the valve and stops them cooling down, allows them to cool down, stops them overheating. If they overheat, they can actually burn, and then they start, well, basically they're ruined as well. So it's fairly important for two reasons: that the valves seat properly. So I do think, for the sake of $30, you can see that lip there quite obviously. For the sake of $30, I'll probably replace the valves. It's a tough thing to know what to do in terms of an engine that's 40 years old, probably been flogged. These little bollocks, you're probably running them at full revs all the time to get them anywhere. Again, you sort of ask yourself the question if it's worth actually trying to spend money on it, or just get it back into a running condition, even if it's running not very powerfully. But I think for $30 it's probably worth throwing in a set of valves. The other side of that argument is the piston rings, because if they're not sealing properly, you're still going to have issues in terms of lack of compression and oil escaping through and all that kind of stuff. But from what I could see, the piston rings looked pretty good. And when I put it back together again, I again checked that there's a nice seal between the piston and the cylinder. But yeah, that looked like it was all right. So that's kind of the head pulled apart. My next job, which is probably why I'm procrastinating and talking about other stuff, is to actually start cleaning this stuff up, and my plan is to paint it. So I'm going to paint the engine black. I think that'll look pretty cool. So as you can see, this cylinder head is, as is all the other parts of the engine, is covered in gunge. And it takes a bit of cleaning. I'll just get, again, this is not ideal because it's aluminium, but you can see even just scraping it, it really doesn't want to come off very easily. I've already soaked this in degreaser and given it a scrub with a nylon brush and then a bit of Scotch-Brite stuff. So again, it's just going to be a process of soaking it with degreaser and scrubbing the bejeepers out of it. I have got a couple of brass wire wheels that fit on my drill, so worst case scenarios I might get those up into it. But you can see even this, just that oxidation, yeah, again 40 years of sitting out in the weather, hasn't done any favours. So I want to try and clean that up. I figure if I put that back on the bike, it's going to look pretty crappy, pretty rough. The other one is the actual engine block, or the engine casing. Again, you can see just how grimy that is. I haven't really hit that with anything yet, but yeah, it takes a fair bit of elbow grease to kind of get that. And it's not just grease, it's really baked on grime. It takes a fair bit to get that off. Okay, I'll just pop you over to the other side of the bench. So these are all my bits and pieces so far. Let's start over here. So these are two covers. These are the points cover and the little flywheel cover. So my plan is to actually polish those up to a near a mirror finish as I can get to. So I reckon that'll look pretty cool with the black engine and these two bits nice and shiny. Still tossing up what colour to paint the bike. Sort of hovering between a matte black or maybe even a white. I thought, you know, white bike with black engine might also look pretty cool. I've got I like white bikes. My current bike is white, just because it's what it is. But yeah, they tend to stand out a bit more and a little bit different. Everyone else has got dark coloured bikes. Anyway, so yeah, I'm going to polish these up to a hopefully a mirror finish. Even this one, you can see the amount of crud, and it's not just oil; it's baked on grime over many years. So that'll take a bit of work to get off. I am going to replace the screws. You can see that one's been well and truly abused, mainly by me. Excuse me. So yeah, I'll replace those screws as well. So what I went and bought, so yeah, to polish that up, I've got myself some of this stuff. Apparently it's alright according to YouTube. It's funny, you go on YouTube or the internet and you kind of get all these different opinions of how to do stuff. Some people say not to use sandpaper, some people say do use sandpaper. I think it's a bit of that collective wisdom of the crowd. You kind of look at enough opinions and kind of work out where the middle ground is and what most people seem to be doing. And again, for this, I think I'm going to have to use a bit of sandpaper to get an initial finish, and then buff that out as best I can. So again, I spent a whopping $5 and got myself a little polishing wheel, and another little one that goes on the drill with a bit of compound. There's about $5 I think for that, $10 maybe. A couple of wire wheels to clean off the other stuff as well. So a couple of toys there to try and see what they do. So for the rest of the engine, my plan is to paint it black. So I hit this the other day. This is the clutch cover. Again, I thought about trying to get this to a mirror finish, but I've spent probably an hour or so on this already, and you can still see it's pretty rough. Just trying to get that oxidation layer off. So I've hit this with degreaser, scrubbing brushes. I'll then hit it with the brass wheel in the end, and then I'm going to come back with some sandpaper down to about a 1200 grit to try and get a fine finish on it, and then give it a coat of paint. So the paint I bought I got these two cans, two for $25, bargain. So this is an engine primer, so an etch primer, and it's designed to withstand heat so it shouldn't peel off. Also resistant to oil and fluids. I've heard of people who paint their engines and then the carby spills and a bit of petrol goes on it, and just peels the paint off. So this is resistant to oil and fluids, so hopefully that will withstand a bit of oil and fuel and stuff. So yeah, first coat with a primer in the grey, and then second coat again. This is the engine designed to take the heat of the engine without being damaged, and then it's a low gloss finish. So that'll be the whole engine covered in that stuff, except for these two covers. So my next job, which is why I'm procrastinating, is to actually get these prepped for painting. Aluminium is quite tricky to paint to. Paint doesn't really want to stick to it. I think mainly because of that aluminium oxide layer that forms on the outside. So really I've got to make sure these are dirt-free and oil-free as best I can. So like I say, I'm going to polish them down to probably about a 1200 grit of sandpaper before painting, and then degrease them, rinse them as best I can, and probably even wipe down with some alcohol or some acetone just to make sure they are spotlessly clean so the paint does actually stick to it, and we'll see where we go from there. So yeah, got the clutch cover. Again, this you can see there's an awful lot of work that needs to be done on that to try and get that up to a paintable standard. and the cast iron cylinder, which is again very rusty looking. It's going to take a bit of a work. At least I can hit this with a wire wheel because it's a cast iron thing, so be able to hit that a bit harder. I did hit up, this is the engine head cover. I've sort of had a bit of a quick go at that. You can see that sort of come up all right, but you can still see in those corners there's still basically just baked on dirt, grime, oxide layer. It's still going to have to come off before paint, because paint won't stick to that stuff, obviously. And then this is one of the other covers. This is kind of what it started looking like. You can see it's again pretty rough looking. So a good few hours of elbow grease involved coming up, which is probably not my favourite thing, but it's probably a fairly cathartic activity, I guess, to kind of sit and just sort of work away at it, and hopefully see a decent end result. And again, I'm going to clean up the heads of the screws, so these screws don't look too bad. Clean them up and I'll paint those as well. A lot of people, you see them actually assemble the entire engine and then hit it with a paint. The problem with that is then all your joins are painted, and all the screws are painted in place with the things they're screwed to. So if you do need to pull it apart, you end up damaging the paint. In terms of, as soon as you turn the screw, you tend to rip the paint around the screw head. So they kind of look all right, but in terms of practicality and getting back into the engine, it's not great. So it's a lot more time consuming and tedious, but I am going to paint each piece individually. So that way when I assemble it, I know if I need to pull it apart again, I can do so without causing major damage, other than maybe just touching up a screw head or something like that. Of course, doing it individually is going to mean a fair bit of masking up. So obviously, you don't want paint into the gears here, so I'll need, mask that up. All the screw holes, all the oil rings, all that kind of stuff will need to be sealed up. So again, it's going to take a bit of work to get it even just ready before I start painting. Once I've got it painted, I can then magically stick it all back together again. And again, no idea if it's going to work or not, but at least then we've got a complete engine, and then we can move on to the carburetor and get that up and running. It's kind of an interesting little process. One of my issues has been some of that anxiety that's kind of sort of built up in the last few months that I've never had before. And even this project has given me a little bit of anxiety in terms of it's too big, it's too much, what if I do it wrong? Should I buy a new valve? Should I stick with the old ones? So I've kind of got to give myself the freedom to say it's actually okay if I stuff it up, because it doesn't really matter. Just do the best you can. Worst case is you can pull it apart and try again. So with the valves, for the sake of $30, who really cares? But I still sort of got a bit worked up around what I should do with that. Making that decision was difficult, which is weird. What I often do is come into my shed, and there's my little favourite chair, the old milk crate, and I'll just sit here and sit down and actually just look at the bike, which sounds really weird, and just, for example, okay, what am I going to do to the mudguard? What shape will I cut it? It's got a few dings in it, how will I get that out? So quite often I just come and spend half an hour just sitting here looking, not doing any work as such, but just looking at the bike and thinking about it and what I can do to it. And looking at the battery cover, how could I build a cover that would fit over that to tidy up that mess, and that brake pedal, that sort of stuff. So just sit there and just look at it without doing any work on it, which is it's good, it's relaxing, and you don't feel guilty about it, but it's just a nice way of I guess mindfulness, perhaps, if I can use that word, in terms of being just sitting at one with the engine, with the motor, with the bike. So yes, like I say, there are times when I feel a bit overwhelmed by the project, because the more you look, the more things you see that, or how am I going to fix that? What do I do? How do I do that? If you watch these other videos, you'll have realised by now I have no idea what I'm doing, but I'm just kind of making it up as I go along and trying to research as much as I can to work out what I should or shouldn't be doing. And you're probably all laughing at me for the mistakes I'm making, but I'm having a good time, and I just need to keep thinking it doesn't really matter if I do it wrong. It's part of it's the journey that matters, I guess, not the destination as such. So hopefully the destination will be a cool little bike at the end of it. Okay, that's all for now. I better get back to some cleaning, and hopefully in a few days I can show you some decent results of that. Thank you.